In the early months of 1812, when England's drawing rooms glittered with ambition and every whispered remark could shape a woman's future, the Harrow estate prepared for an evening that would mark a turning point. Servants hurried beneath chandeliers polished to a mirror sheen, footmen adjusted velvet drapes, and the air felt trained toward spectacle. At the center of this elegant machinery stood Lady Eugenia Harrow, famed for her beauty in every county, rehearsing the precise angle of her smile before a gilt-framed mirror. She was a masterpiece sculpted through years of careful instruction, graceful, accomplished, and adorned in satin that shimmered like water. To the guests who would soon arrive, she would appear the natural bride for the newly returned Duke of Aylesford, a role she fully intended to claim. Nearby, half hidden near a column, her cousin Clara adjusted the hem of her modest gown. Clara lived in the household as a dependent, a quiet presence valued for her usefulness rather than her station. Her gown, faded at the seams, contrasted starkly with Eugenia's splendor. Those who noticed her at all often described her as the family's burden, a well-read but inconsequential shadow. Yet Clara's demeanor remained steady, her voice gentle, her eyes carrying a calm intelligence that hardship had not dimmed. That evening she had been assigned simple duties, offering books to guests, guiding them toward the library, ensuring the candles burned evenly. She accepted the tasks without complaint. She had grown accustomed to being invisible. But as she passed a cluster of young ladies, their voices drifted after her. "They keep her here out of pity," one whispered. "A shadow in a house far too hungry for recognition," another added. The words pierced her composure, though she continued her work with steady hands. The arrival of the Duke silenced every whisper. A hush rippled through the hall as he entered, a tall man with a reserved expression, carrying the bearing of someone who had spent years abroad navigating foreign courts. Rumor insisted he possessed a mind unmoved by superficial charm. Eugenia stepped forward with radiant confidence, greeting him with a smile polished through years of social training. She spoke of the estate's improvements and the pleasure of welcoming him home. Her voice was smooth, her posture exquisite, each gesture calculated to please. The Duke listened with courtesy but little interest. His gaze drifted beyond her toward the shelves of books lining the room. When he noticed Clara holding a worn volume of medieval poetry, a quiet shift crossed his expression. He approached her with measured steps, his tone low but unfailingly polite. "You guard that book as though it were something precious," he remarked. Clara curtsied, startled. "The binding is fragile, Your Grace. I wished only to protect it." His eyes moved to the title, and a faint softening appeared. "A thoughtful custodian," he said. Their exchange was brief, but enough to draw subtle attention, for the Duke seemed more intrigued by the quiet cousin than by the celebrated beauty before him. Eugenia's smile tightened. Clara retreated to a window where moonlight softened the room's edges. She kept her gaze lowered, determined not to invite reprimand. Yet she felt an unfamiliar unease, a sense of being observed. She told herself it meant nothing. Men of his rank often noticed unusual things only to forget them moments later. As the evening unfolded, Eugenia displayed her talents flawlessly. She danced with elegance, conversed with practiced wit, and carried herself as though the future already belonged to her. But the Duke's attention remained scattered. When she extended her hand for the traditional parting kiss after a dance, he bowed politely but refrained, turning instead to return a misplaced atlas to Clara. She had not realized she had dropped it earlier, and he handed it back with a quiet, "I believe this belongs to you." His tone held warmth absent from his interactions with anyone else. A stir passed through the hall. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, though her voice remained steady. "You are kind to return it, Your Grace. I merely meant to keep it safe." Her humility seemed to interest him further. "Safety is not often appreciated," he replied. The exchange lingered just long enough to deepen speculation. He departed soon after, offering a final nod meant solely for Clara, subtle, deliberate, unmistakably intentional. She watched him vanish into the night air, unsettled by the quiet meaning of that gesture. She knew all too well the danger of being noticed by a man of his rank. Notice led to gossip, and gossip could break a woman far more completely than cruelty. And yet she felt something stir inside her, an emotion she resisted naming. Eugenia approached then, each step sharp beneath her silken grace. "Do remember your place, dear Clara," she murmured, her voice sweet but trembling with concealed anger. The Duke was merely being polite. Clara lowered her eyes. Of course. But the truth refused to fade. In the Duke's brief nod she had felt something rare, acknowledgement. Not admiration, not promise, but recognition of her as a person rather than an inconvenience. Though Clara wished to dismiss the moment as a fleeting courtesy, the household felt its tremor by morning. Servants exchanged knowing glances, guests carried whispers into town, and the Harrow family moved with brittle cheer that failed to mask their unease. Eugenia spent breakfast speaking of the Duke's likely admiration, but her laughter rang too sharply, each note betraying her fear that something had slipped beyond her reach. Clara sensed the tension but kept her eyes lowered. Yet beneath her calm exterior, a quiet uncertainty unfolded, delicate as a newly formed crack in glass. She understood nothing had truly happened, and yet everything felt changed, as though one unexpected glance had shifted the axis of her small, ordered world. By the end of the week, Clara sensed the air of the Harrow estate tightening like a corset laced too firmly. Everywhere she walked, conversations stilled, glances sharpened, and the faint rustle of skirts trailed behind her like whispered accusations. What had been merely discomfort after the Duke's unexpected courtesy now became a quiet storm. Servants who once spoke to her with gentle familiarity began offering shallow bows, as though fearful of being linked to a scandal not yet spoken aloud. Even the maids who helped her mend her worn gowns seemed startled when she entered a room, as though her presence carried consequence. The Harrow family, meanwhile, adopted an air of brittle politeness. At breakfast Lady Harrow maintained a smile that never reached her eyes, speaking of the Duke with strained enthusiasm, while her husband spoke of advantageous alliances with sudden urgency. Eugenia's laugh returned, high and shimmering, but its tone carried sharp edges. She brushed Clara's presence aside as though it were a stain she hoped no one would look at too closely. Yet she watched Clara constantly, seeking some hint of ambition that might justify her growing irritation. Clara, aware of her vulnerability, did everything possible to shrink from the center of attention. She kept to the quieter halls, ate meals in the small corner of the servants' dining room she preferred, and spent her evenings repairing old books in the library. She wished for nothing more than anonymity. But anonymity, once lost, rarely returns. 2 days after the reception, a small parcel arrived addressed to her. Clara stared at it for several minutes before daring to unwrap the thin paper. Inside lay a slim volume of medieval poetry bound in deep blue cloth, its pages edged in gold leaf. She inhaled sharply. The book was beautiful, far beyond anything she could have afforded. When she opened the cover, her breath caught again. Pressed between the pages was a small note, written in elegant script, for the mind that understands the quiet between lines. Her hands trembled. She looked about the room to ensure she was alone. No one must see it. She tucked the book beneath her shawl and carried it swiftly to the library, placing it on a high shelf behind volumes rarely touched. A gift from the Duke was not merely improper, it was dangerous, a spark waiting to become ruin. Eugenia discovered her minutes later. She swept into the room with the grace of a debutante and the precision of a hawk. "There you are," she said in a tone far too sweet. "Mother wondered why you've vanished from the morning preparations." Her eyes scanned Clara's face with such intent that Clara felt stripped bare. "You look flushed. Have you exerted yourself?" Clara gave a faint smile. "Only a bit of dust in the air." Eugenia moved closer, her perfume overwhelming. "Do take care not to give anyone the impression you seek attention." The words brushed Clara's cheek like a gloved slap. She lowered her gaze, swallowing the ache in her throat. When Eugenia left, the library seemed to exhale in relief. The next afternoon brought a heavy rain that trapped Clara outside longer than she intended. She had gone to gather herbs for the cook, hoping the quiet task might clear her troubled thoughts. But the sky broke open suddenly, sending her running to a garden pavilion for shelter. Rain roared against the slate roof, cold and unrelenting. As she caught her breath, she realized she was not alone. The Duke stood in the doorway, raindrops clinging to his dark coat, his expression startled but not displeased to find her there. "Miss Harrow," he greeted gently, stepping inside just enough to escape the storm. She curtsied, heart quickening. "Your Grace, forgive me. I did not expect anyone to be here." He shook rain from his gloves, a faint smile touching his lips. "Nor did I. Yet storms often reveal the most unexpected company." She did not know how to answer, so she remained silent, listening to the rain drum against the roof. After a moment he spoke again, his tone softer. "I have noticed how others look at you of late. I hope my words or actions have not caused you trouble." Her pulse throbbed painfully. "People look at me however they choose, Your Grace. I do not merit much concern." He studied her with an intensity that made her look away. "You merit far more than you believe." She felt her composure waver. "Please," she whispered, "you must not speak so. It invites misunderstanding." He stepped closer, though still at a respectful distance. "Misunderstanding can be corrected," he murmured. "Silence, however, often leads to greater harm." For a moment the pavilion felt suspended in time, two lives held together by the fragile tether of a conversation neither should have. His gaze moved to her damp sleeves. "You are chilled." She clasped her hands tightly. "I will be fine." He seemed about to extend his cloak but stopped himself, his restraint palpable. "I would never wish to endanger your reputation," he said. "Yet I confess I find myself troubled when I see you dismissed." Her breath caught. "You must not concern yourself with me." "I cannot seem to avoid it," he replied. Footsteps sounded along the gravel path, and both stiffened. A pair of servants passed the pavilion, calling for Clara. The Duke stepped back immediately, his expression returning to formal neutrality. She curtsied again, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for your concern, Your Grace." He inclined his head. "Take care, Miss Harrow." The moment dissolved, leaving only the echo of what had nearly happened. By evening, the estate was alive with whispered scandal. Someone had seen Clara and the Duke speaking beneath the pavilion's roof. Though the truth was innocent, the embellishments were not. In the drawing-room, Lady Harrow scolded Clara before a circle of guests, her words disguised as gracious instruction. "One must avoid unsupervised corners of the estate," she declared. "Such carelessness can easily be misinterpreted." The humiliation burned, but Clara endured it with stoic calm. The Duke, hearing the rebuke, intervened with quiet steel. "The storm forced Miss Harrow into shelter," he said. "Any fault is mine for speaking with her, rather than leaving her alone in the cold." His tone carried authority that silenced the room. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Clara stared at the floor, mortified, yet a faint warmth spread through her chest, proof that someone, at last, had spoken on her behalf. When night fell, she retreated to her room at the farthest edge of the house. As she prepared for bed, she noticed something on the windowsill, a single white gardenia, fresh despite the storm. Clara touched its petals with trembling fingers. It was a flower their gardens did not grow. Far across the estate grounds, a lone rider disappeared into the fading mist. The gesture was simple, perilous, and impossible to ignore. Clara sensed the fragile balance of her life shifting again, though she had no notion of how profoundly that bloom would alter her fate. The days following the appearance of the gardenia unfolded with a tense stillness, as though the world itself waited for something inevitable. Clara kept the flower hidden between the pages of an old atlas, terrified that discovery would bring ruin. Yet she returned to it often, her fingers brushing its fading petals, unable to deny the quiet truth it represented. The Duke's attentions, however restrained, however respectful, were not imagined. They were real, and real things carried consequences. The Harrow household carried on with strained civility. Lady Harrow planned dinners with renewed fervor, inviting families who might reassure the world that Eugenia still held every hope of becoming a duchess. Eugenia herself grew increasingly brittle, her smiles cracked, revealing flashes of frustration she could no longer mask. She monitored Clara with the precision of a watchman guarding a locked door, as though preventing her from breathing too deeply might halt the whispers spreading through town. Clara bore the scrutiny with quiet endurance. She kept to her duties, refused invitations to speak privately with guests, and avoided the gardens entirely. Yet no distance she imposed could halt the Duke's intentions, which unfolded like a tide rising without regard for stone barriers. She sensed it in the servants' murmurs, in the way his carriage arrived more frequently, and in the subtle shifts of tension each time he entered a room in which she tried to disappear. One cold morning, a footman delivered a message requesting Clara's presence in the estate's old chapel. She hesitated, fear rooting her to the spot. The chapel had been unused for decades, a place the family treated as a relic of an earlier generation. She knew instantly who awaited her. Though her better judgment screamed for her to decline, something deeper, something both tender and desperate, propelled her forward. She slipped through the silent corridors and crossed the frosted courtyard, her heart hammering against her ribs. Inside the chapel, dust motes floated through shafts of pale sunlight, illuminating rows of wooden pews softened by time. At the far end, standing near the altar with his hands clasped behind his back, was the Duke. He turned at the sound of her steps, his expression gentled by relief. "Miss Harrow," he said quietly. "Thank you for coming." Clara felt her breath catch. "Your Grace, I should not be here." Her voice trembled despite her efforts. "If anyone discovers, I will bear whatever consequence may come," he said, his tone steady. "I asked to speak with you because I fear my silence has already placed you in danger." He hesitated, searching her face, as though seeking permission to continue. "The fault is mine. I have allowed admiration to show where caution should have ruled." She folded her hands tightly. "It is not admiration that troubles them," she said softly. "It is the idea that someone like you might look twice at someone like me." The honesty surprised even her. A shadow passed through his expression, sorrow mixed with something fiercer. He stepped closer, though still maintaining a respectful space. "Clara," he murmured, her name spoken without title for the first time. "You are not defined by their measures. You possess a composure I have rarely seen, a mind that speaks through every glance you dare not voice. I have found myself thinking of you more often than propriety allows." Her heart felt painfully fragile. "You speak kindly, Your Grace, but you must not. It will destroy you." He shook his head with a quiet conviction that made her breath falter. "I am far less fragile than the society that judges us. What destroys me is watching you endure humiliation you do not deserve." The chapel fell silent. Dust drifted through air that felt suddenly warmer, charged with unspoken longing. He reached for her hand, stopped, then allowed his fingers to brush hers lightly, an intimate gesture rendered scandalous by its sincerity. Clara met his gaze at last, seeing not a duke governed by duty, but a man wrestling with the weight of choice. "If you continue this path," she whispered, "your reputation is mine to risk," he answered. "But your dignity is mine to defend." Emotion surged unexpectedly, leaving her unable to speak. For the first time in her life, Clara felt seen, not as an obligation or a charity case, but as a woman whose presence mattered. And that realization terrified her more than any reprimand the Harrows could inflict. "What do you want of me?" she asked at last. He exhaled slowly, as though the question carried both hope and burden. "I want honesty. Do you wish me to distance myself? If that is your wish, I will obey it." His voice lowered to a near whisper. "But if you feel even a fraction of what I do." She closed her eyes. Her heart, once disciplined into silence, pushed against the confines of reason. "I do," she breathed. "But wanting something does not make it possible." He stepped nearer, their hands brushing again. "Then let me be the one to worry about what is possible." She felt a tremor pass through her, the beginning of surrender. Yet fear lingered. "This cannot remain hidden," she murmured. "It will come to light." He nodded. "Then let it." Before she could respond, the chapel door rattled. Voices drifted faintly from the courtyard, footsteps approaching. The Duke released her hand immediately, his expression returning to composed neutrality. "We must not risk discovery," he said gently. "But I ask only this. Trust me." Clara's throat tightened. She managed a faint nod before slipping out the side door, her pulse racing. The next evening brought the gathering that would unravel every restraint. The estate hosted a dinner in honor of several neighboring families. Eugenia appeared more radiant than ever, her gown a shimmering declaration that she still believed herself destined for greatness. Clara remained with the servants, ensuring decanters were polished and table linens straightened, grateful to be unnoticed. But the Duke arrived with an expression of firm resolve. He greeted the guests, tolerated the formalities, and suffered Eugenia's rehearsed conversation with barely concealed impatience. When she attempted to guide him toward the center of the room, he stepped away, leaving her stunned. His gaze swept the crowded hall until it found Clara beside a tray of glassware. She froze as he approached. The murmurs began before he even reached her. He stopped a breath away, the weight of the room gathering like storm clouds overhead. "Miss Harrow," he said, voice low but resonant enough for all to hear. "I have been searching for you." Clara's heart pounded painfully. "Your Grace," she whispered. "Please." But he silenced her with a single, reverent gesture. His hand touched her chin, lifting it gently, as though inviting the world to witness what he was no longer willing to hide. And then, before the stunned assembly of nobles, servants, and the family that had dismissed her all her life, he lowered his lips to hers. It was a kiss devoid of haste or hesitation, soft, deliberate, claiming nothing but confessing everything. Gasps filled the hall. A glass shattered. Eugenia swayed where she stood, her future collapsing with a single breath. But Clara felt only the quiet, overwhelming certainty that her life had just been irrevocably altered. When he pulled back, his gaze held hers with unwavering clarity. "I will speak with your guardians at dawn," he said. "You have my word." And Clara, trembling beneath the weight of such audacity, understood at last that the world she had been taught to fear was already reshaping itself around her.